Aleatory Podcast.
I want you to try a bit of a thought experiment with me.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So close your eyes, obviously only if you're in a place where you safely can. And I want you to really focus on the physical boundaries of your own body.
Right, just feeling your physical presence in the room.
Exactly. Feel the steady, sort of autonomic rhythm of your lungs expanding and contracting. Notice the absolute conscious control you have over your fingers.
It's something we take completely for granted every single day.
We really do. Like if you decide to tap your index finger right now, you just do it. There's this seamless, basically instantaneous command sent from your prefrontal cortex down your spinal cord out to your peripheral nerves, and the muscle just obeys.
Right, the system just works.
But now I want you to imagine a physiological command completely overriding that entire system.
Oh, man. Okay.
Imagine a signal firing from the absolute deepest, most primitive, most ancient regions of your brain, like the basal ganglia or the brainstem. And it is completely bypassing your conscious control.
So your conscious mind is just, what, trapped?
Yes, your conscious mind is literally screaming at your legs to stand still. But your body simply refuses to listen. You are receiving a physical imperative that you absolutely cannot override.
Think about the profound terror of that specific situation. If you slow down and truly sit with the implications of that disconnect, it is horrifying.
It really is. Your muscles begin to contract and release rhythmically. You are moving.
You are exerting massive amounts of kinetic energy, and you have absolutely no say in the matter.
Not at all.
We operate under this foundational, almost sacred assumption of bodily autonomy,
Yeah.
We fundamentally believe that we are the captains of our physical vessels.
Right. That my arm moves because I told it to move.
Exactly. But what happens when the mind is trapped inside a biological machine that is acting out a nightmare? I mean, you aren't unconscious. You aren't asleep.
You are entirely lucid.
Yes. You are watching your own limbs flail. You can feel the sharp burn of lactic acid building up in your calves and your thighs.
Oh, the physical pain of it.
Yeah, you can feel the cartilage in your joints grinding down, the ligaments stretching past their breaking point, and yet you are merely a passenger.
You're just along for the ride.
You are locked in this fleshy prison that has been hijacked by a bizarre, relentless compulsion. It is a profound loss of sovereignty.
And it forces us to confront a really uncomfortable reality, doesn't it?
It does. The conscious control we think we have over our bodies is actually a very, very fragile illusion.
And what we're talking about today is not just a terrifying hypothetical scenario. It is a highly documented historical reality.
Which is the craziest part.
Right. We're looking at an event where an entire city lost its collective mind. A moment where the boundary between physical illness and cultural nightmare completely dissolved into this localized apocalypse of the human nervous system.
Welcome to the episode. Together we turn knowledge into real results.
We're using a massive stack of historical chronicles, medical journals, and psychological frameworks today to dissect a 500-year-old mystery.
And I think it is absolutely vital that we approach this not as some, quaint, exaggerated medieval fairy tale.
Right. This isn't just folklore.
No, this is a chilling, highly rigorous case study in human psychology and physiology. The primary sources we have, the municipal records, the letters from desperate physicians, the first-hand accounts of city councilmen.
They all point to the exact same thing.
Exactly. They point to a society that was pushed so far beyond the brink of psychological endurance that their trauma physically mutated into something completely unprecedented.
So let's set the scene. The date is July 14th, 1518.
Okay.
The place is Strasbourg. It's this bustling, densely packed, incredibly prosperous city within the Holy Roman Empire, located in what is now modern-day France.
And it's the middle of summer, right?
It is the absolute height of a blistering summer.
Oh.
I want you to picture the suffocating heat just radiating off the narrow cobblestone streets.
Oh, brutal.
Picture the heavy, half-timbered houses leaning precariously over the alleyways, basically trapping all the humid air down at street level.
So it's an oven.
A total oven. And out of one of these houses steps a woman. She's known in the historical chronicles as Frau Trophäa.
Okay, Frau Trophäa.
She walks out of the oppressive summer heat, steps onto the uneven cobblestones, and she simply begins to dance.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. There is no town festival happening. There are no musicians playing in the square. There is no visible stimulus whatsoever.
Wow.
She just begins to twist and twirl and shake. Her body is moving in this frantic, completely involuntary rhythm, and she's doing it entirely in silence.
But wait, let's pause here. Biologically speaking, how is that even possible?
What do you mean?
Well, human beings are equipped with these highly sensitive evolutionary fail-safes, right? They are designed specifically to prevent us from moving ourselves to death.
Oh, like exhaustion setting in.
Exactly. When you exert yourself, even just, going for a hard run, your body eventually floods with pain signals. Your muscles deplete their glycogen stores.
You literally hit a wall.
Right. The cardiovascular system sends these overwhelming signals demanding rest just to prevent a massive heart attack. We are hardwired for self-preservation.
Yeah, your brain says, stop before you break something.
So how does a human being simply continue an aerobic output of that magnitude without their nervous system just entirely shutting them down?
That is exactly what makes Frau Troffe's situation so incredibly horrific. She didn't just dance for an hour. She didn't dance until she got tired.
How long did she go?
According to the Chronicles of the Imlin family and several other contemporary accounts we have, she danced in silence for 4 to 6 days.
4 to 6 days. That's impossible.
Her husband literally followed her into the street, crying and pleading with her to come inside, to sit down, to just stop moving.
And she didn't respond.
She ignored him entirely. Or, more accurately, she couldn't respond to him. She was locked in.
Yeah.
And her physical deterioration was grotesque.
I can't even imagine the state of her feet.
Exactly. Think about the impact of jumping and twirling on bare cobblestones in thin 16th century leather shoes.
Oh, they would be shredded.
They were. Her feet swelled massively. The skin broke and she bled heavily. Her shoes were completely soaked through with blood.
And the dehydration in that heat.
The sweat was just pouring off her frame, leading to severe dehydration. She only stopped when she collapsed into a twitching, involuntary heap of sheer, life-threatening exhaustion.
So she did eventually collapse.
Yes, she would lie there in the dirt, completely unresponsive. But here is the terrifying part. She would lie there until her body recovered just enough of a baseline caloric and cardiovascular capacity.
Wait, like just a few hours of rest?
Maybe a few hours of unconscious rest, yeah. And then she would suddenly wake up, stand back up on her ruined, bleeding feet, and start the frantic dancing all over again.
That completely defies our modern understanding of metabolic endurance. I mean, the cardiovascular strain alone should have killed her within the first 48 hours.
It absolutely should have.
And the real nightmare here is that this wasn't an isolated psychiatric break. It wasn't just one woman suffering a localized neurological event.
No, she was just the beginning.
Right. Frau Troffe was an ignition point. She was eventually restrained, loaded onto a wagon, and taken away to Saverne.
To the mountaintop shrine, right?
Yes, to a shrine dedicated to St. Vitus in the hopes of some kind of spiritual cure. But removing her did absolutely nothing to stop what she had already started.
The match was already lit.
Exactly. The damage to the psychological fabric of the city had already been done.
She was removed, but within a week of her initial physical break, 34 other people in Strasbourg stepped out of their homes, walked into the streets, and joined the silent, frantic dance.
34 people just copying the behavior.
Yep. And within a month, that number had swelled to nearly 400 people.
400. That is a massive portion of the population for that time.
It was a full-blown epidemic.
Yeah.
The main city squares were transformed into this surreal, grotesque theater of continuous, agonizing movement.
There's hundreds of people flailing.
Men, women, and young children, all twirling, collapsing from exhaustion, lying twitching on the ground, and then staggering back up to resume the rhythm.
I want to really emphasize the biological limits of what is happening here because I think the modern mind struggles to comprehend the sheer physical toll.
It's hard to visualize, yeah.
We are talking about 400 people engaged in sustained, high-intensity cardiovascular exertion during a sweltering 16th century European summer.
With no Gatorade, no AC.
Exactly. Without intravenous hydration, without modern electrolyte replenishment, the mortality rate must have been absolutely catastrophic.
It was horrific. Modern medical historian John Waller has extensively analyzed the physiological demands of this specific event.
What did he find?
He pointed out that not even an elite modern Olympic marathon runner, someone with perfect training, optimal nutrition, and scientifically calibrated hydration.
Right, someone in peak physical condition.
Right. Not even they could survive the physical exertion these people endured. The human heart simply cannot sustain that level of kinetic output day after day.
So people were dying in the streets.
The historical chronicles report that at the absolute peak of the plague, up to 15 people were dying every single day.
15 a day. That's a massacre.
They were dying right there in the streets from sudden cardiac arrest, from massive ischemic strokes, and from sheer dehydration and metabolic failure.
And we need to clear up a massive misconception right now.
Oh, about the mood of the crowd.
Yeah. When you hear the phrase dancing plague, you might naturally picture a joyous, manic revelry, like a party that got out of hand.
Right, like a medieval rave.
But witnesses standing on the sidelines reported the exact opposite. These people were not smiling. They were not having fun.
They were in pure agony.
They were crying out in pain. They were weeping uncontrollably, literally begging for mercy from God, begging the bystanders to physically restrain them.
That is so dark they wanted to stop.
Yes. Their eyes were described as completely vacant and expressionless, rolling back in their heads. They were thrashing in a wild, unthinking delirium. They were literal prisoners of their own kinetic momentum.
So to understand the mechanics of how a localized individual behavior becomes a mass kinetic contagion that kills 15 people a day, we have to look deeply into the environment that incubated it.
Absolutely. A behavioral contagion of this magnitude does not just spontaneously emerge in a vacuum.
It needs fuel.
It requires a highly specific set of environmental, biological, and psychological preconditions. If we want to understand why the collective psyche of Strasbourg fractured so violently in July of 1518, we have to spiral outward.
We need to look at the psychological pressure cooker of early 16th century Europe.
Exactly.
I actually found myself thinking of the societal stress in Strasbourg at that time like a massive geological fault line.
Oh, I like that analogy. How so?
Well, you have these huge, incredibly heavy tectonic plates of human misery grinding against each other for years, building up this invisible but immense localized pressure.
Right, the tension is just mounting beneath the surface.
Exactly. On the surface, if you walk through Strasbourg in 1517, the city looks somewhat normal. People are trading, going to church, doing their daily chores.
But underneath, it's a different story.
Underneath, the tension is reaching a physics-defying threshold. And when it finally snaps, the resulting earthquake doesn't look like the ground shaking. It looks like 400 people dancing themselves into cardiac arrest.
So what were the specific plates grinding together? What was causing all this misery?
Let me give you the specifics, because Strasbourg had suffered through a relentless, agonizing sequence of disasters. First, you have 3 consecutive years of brutal, crop-destroying famine.
3 years, so the baseline is starvation.
The population was essentially starving to death. And then a spectacularly bitter winter in 1514 was so severe that people literally froze to death in their own beds.
That is unimaginable.
Then, the year 1517 was recorded in the municipal chronicles simply and ominously as a bad year. Grain prices had skyrocketed to a generational high.
Which means the working poor couldn't afford bread.
Right. They were fundamentally chronically malnourished. Their immune systems were already entirely decimated before the dancing even started.
And you have to compound that chronic malnutrition with the pervasive daily terror of infectious disease.
Right, because this is pre-germ theory.
Exactly. You have to put yourself in the mindset of someone living before germ theory. They were living in the constant looming shadow of the bubonic plague.
Which just kept coming back.
Yes, it kept returning in terrifying, unpredictable waves. They were dealing with smallpox outbreaks, and they were terrified by a mysterious, highly lethal affliction known as the English sweat.
The English sweat. I've always found that one so creepy. We still don't even know exactly what it was, right?
We don't. It was possibly a hantavirus, but we know it could take a perfectly healthy, strong man and kill him in a matter of hours through violent fevers and extreme sweating.
Just dead by nightfall.
Exactly. And crucially, a terrifying new arrival had just begun to ravage the European population around this exact time: syphilis. And 16th century syphilis was not the slow-moving, manageable disease we know today.
No, it was much more aggressive.
It was a virulent, aggressive strain that caused flesh to literally rot off the bones of the living. So you have a population whose physical bodies are already compromised, living in a constant state of visceral biological terror.
But the physical suffering is only half of the equation, right? The spiritual and cultural terror in Strasbourg was arguably even more profound.
The psychological weight must have been unbearable.
The religious and social frameworks that usually provide comfort in hard times were completely collapsing around them.
This is right around the Reformation, isn't it?
Yes. Desiderius Erasmus, the great humanist philosopher, visited Strasbourg in 1514, stirring up all this intellectual unrest and questioning of authority.
The old ideas were being challenged.
And then, just 1 year before the dancing plague, In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door in Wittenberg, igniting the Protestant Reformation.
So the bedrock of their reality is shifting.
The absolute, unquestioned authority of the Catholic Church, the institution that governed their eternal souls, was suddenly fracturing.
That alone would cause massive cultural anxiety.
Furthermore, anti-clericalism was rising rapidly. The starving peasants deeply resented the immense wealth and the heavy tithes demanded by the local bishopric.
Because they're starving and the church is rich.
Exactly. We had massive, bloody peasant revolts breaking out across the region. These uprisings were violently and ruthlessly crushed by the nobility.
It was just constant violence.
The bodies of rebels were literally left hanging from trees along the roads leading into Strasbourg as a warning.
Just a horrific visual reminder of their powerlessness.
So the apocalyptic dread was at an absolute maximum. The population was physically starved, politically crushed, and spiritually terrified that God had completely abandoned them. That is the fault line.
And it is onto that specific, highly volatile fault line that the Strasbourg City Council attempts to apply a medical solution.
Oh man, their response.
We have to examine their official response because it serves as an absolute masterclass in catastrophic mismanagement and the unintended consequences of institutional authority.
It really made everything worse.
The local physicians, overseen by the esteemed Council of 21, are called in to assess the situation. Now, we must remember these are highly educated men by the standards of the day.
Right. They weren't just guessing, they were using their science.
Exactly. They immediately rule out supernatural and astrological causes. They do not initially look at the dancers and blame demons or witches.
Which is surprising for the time.
It is. Instead, they apply orthodox Galenic humoral theory. They diagnose the dancing plague as a purely natural disease.
Based on the four humors.
Right. According to the ancient Greek physician Galen, whose texts were absolute gospel at the time, the human body is governed by four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
And illness is just an imbalance of those humors.
Exactly. The physicians declare that the dancers are suffering from hot blood. They believe the patient's body fluxes had literally overheated their brains, causing madness and forcing this involuntary kinetic movement.
I actually find myself trying to inhabit the logic of those physicians,
Yeah.
Because it makes a perverse kind of sense if you accept their premise.
How so?
Think about the traditional wisdom even today. If you have a patient with a severe fever, what do? You tell them to sweat it out.
Right, put them under heavy blankets.
You let the body expel the heat. Therefore, the city's prescription for this plague of hot blood was to force the patients to burn off the excess heat.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If the disease causes dancing, the cure must be to dance the disease out of the system. The official medical prescription was incredibly more dancing.
It sounds logical on paper, given their paradigm, but in practice, it was like trying to put out a grease fire with a bucket of water.
It just spreads the flames.
The council didn't just casually encourage dancing. They actively engineered a massive civic infrastructure to support and amplify it.
This is the part that blows my mind.
They cleared out the vital grain and horse markets to make room. They commandeered the guild halls of the carpenters and the dyers.
They literally brought in lumber and built elevated wooden stages in the public squares.
Yes. They spent municipal treasury funds to hire professional musicians, pipers, drummers, fiddlers to play day and night in shifts.
They even paid healthy, strong men to physically hold up the exhausted dancers so their bodies could continue to move when their legs gave out.
It's astounding. They practically threw a municipal festival for the apocalypse.
They subsidized their own disaster.
Exactly. And the psychological implications of this action are profound. Within the modern framework of mass psychogenic illness, this public spectacle acted as what theorists call an informational precipitation.
Informational precipitation. What does that mean exactly?
It means that by officially sanctioning the dance, by building stages and hiring musicians, the authorities provided absolute institutional validation to the hysteria.
Oh, they made it real.
They sent a clear, unavoidable psychological signal to the desperate, starving population. The signal was, this is a real, tangible disease. It is currently happening to your neighbors, and this specific flailing dance is exactly how you are supposed to act when you catch it.
It was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
By attempting to cure the affliction, the authorities poured gasoline onto a psychological fire, ensuring that the psychic contagion spread exponentially to the masses. They gave the madness a concrete shape, a rhythm, and a highly visible stage.
This pacing of the disaster is crucial to understand. We have the inciting incident with Frau Trofea. We have a population uniquely primed by starvation and apocalyptic terror.
A perfect storm.
Then the city tries the absolute best science of the day, galenic medicine, and it results in a massive public spectacle where up to 15 people are dying daily in the summer heat.
Science has completely, catastrophically failed them.
So, when the rational empirical systems fail to stop the horror, what does a 16th century society do? They pivot immediately and violently to the supernatural.
The religious pivot is swift, absolute, and draconian. The city council finally realizes their catastrophic error.
They tear down the stages, right?
Yes, the wooden stages are violently torn down. A strict ban on music is enacted across the entire city.
No more pipers or drummers.
The only minor exception made is for stringed instruments at private weddings. But even then, drums and tambourines are strictly forbidden.
Because they thought the beat was doing it.
Exactly. The authorities now believe the percussive rhythm is triggering the mania. Furthermore, they begin to scapegoat the marginalized populations.
Of course they do.
Prostitutes, gamblers, and beggars are physically expelled from the city limits in a desperate attempt to purify the civic soul and appease an angry god.
And the cure for the dancers themselves undergoes a radical transformation too. The medical approach is completely abandoned.
So what do they do with the dancers?
The victims, who are still thrashing, weeping, and bleeding, mind you, are physically restrained, loaded to 3 horse wagons, and taken out of the city.
Back to the shrine of St. Vitus.
Yes, they are transported up to the dark, musty mountaintop shrine in Severn. And the ritual performed there by the priests is highly specific and deeply symbolic.
Walk me through the ritual.
They take the exhausted dancers and place them beneath a wooden carving of St. Vitus. They are given red shoes.
Red shoes? Why red?
It's deeply symbolic of blood and sin, but not just any red shoes. These are red shoes with crosses painted on the soles and the tops using consecrated oil.
Wow, the level of detail.
The shoes are sprinkled with holy water. Small wooden crosses are physically pressed into the hands of the thrashing victims. The air in the shrine is thick with heavy incense, and the priests chant Latin incantations over them, demanding the saint lift his curse.
And here's the most fascinating, completely confounding part of this entire historical record.
What's that?
It worked.
It actually worked.
The chronicles all agree that following this intense, highly ritualized intervention, the plague began to rapidly fade. By early September, the epidemic was effectively over.
That is wild.
The dying stopped. The dancing ceased. We have to analyze why a spiritual placebo, an entirely symbolic theatrical intervention involving red shoes and incense, successfully cured a very real, very lethal physical manifestation.
To understand why the red shoes and the incense worked, we actually have to go backward in time. Because the Strasbourg event of 1518 was not an isolated freak occurrence.
It wasn't the first time.
No, this was not the first time this specific localized software glitch happened in the human operating system. There were actually over 10 major outbreaks of dancing plagues between the 14th and 17th centuries.
10 major outbreaks.
And they were almost exclusively localized along the Rhine and Moselle rivers in Europe.
That geographic localization is an incredibly vital clue. The fact that this specific physical symptom keeps happening in one specific region suggests a deeply entrenched regional cultural narrative.
Right, it's not happening in Asia or Africa.
It isn't a universal human response. It's a learned, localized script.
Let's look at the historical precedents that built that script. In 1021, in the town of Kulbik, 18 peasants gathered in a churchyard on Christmas Eve and began to dance and sing, disrupting the local priest's mass.
Bad move in 1021.
Very bad move. The priest, enraged by the interruption, supposedly cursed them to dance for an entire year. And according to the legends that were passed down for generations, they did.
For a whole year.
They were unable to stop until the Archbishop of Cologne finally absolved them. Then, in 1237, there was the Erfurt incident, where over 100 children suddenly began jumping and dancing.
Wait, children?
Yeah, they traveled miles to the town of Arnstadt before finally collapsing in exhaustion. It's actually an event that likely inspired the legend of the Pied Piper.
That makes total sense.
In 1278, a group of choreomaniacs danced onto a bridge over the Meuse River in Maastricht. The bridge literally collapsed under their synchronized rhythm, and hundreds of people drowned.
That is horrifying.
And then there was the massive outbreak in Aachen in 1374, occurring just decades after the trauma of the Black Death, where thousands of people across multiple towns danced wildly, calling out the names of previously unknown demons, their bodies contorting in unimaginable, unnatural ways.
And we must also briefly connect this European phenomenon to the outbreaks of Tarantism in southern Italy, because the parallels are striking.
Oh, right, the spider bite thing.
Yes. In Italy, people, usually women, would fall into a state of severe melancholia and lethargy, eventually culminating in a frenzied, desperate dance.
And they thought it was caused by a spider.
The local cultural belief was that they had been bitten by a tarantula, and the only possible cure was to dance the venom out of their system to a very specific, frantic musical rhythm.
Which became known as the tarantella.
Exactly. The symptoms are slightly different, the supposed cause is different, but you have the exact same underlying mechanism, using frenzied, exhaustive dance as both a manifestation of the illness and the cure.
So into this rich, terrifying history of demonic dancing steps one of the most legendary and controversial figures in the history of medicine, Paracelsus.
Paracelsus.
He is a physician, an alchemist, a radical thinker who actively challenged every established medical doctrine of his time. He arrives in Strasbourg in 1526.
So exactly 8 years after the 1518 dancing plague.
Right, he comes specifically to investigate what happened. He is actually the one who coins the medical term choreomania, derived from the Greek word choros, meaning dance, and mania, meaning madness.
Paracelsus's analysis of the Strasbourg event is a profound collision of brilliant, forward-thinking insight and absolute blinding bias.
How so?
He systematically unpacks the phenomenon and categorizes it into 3 distinct types. First, he proposes chorea naturalis.
What's that?
This, he claims, is caused by physical shifts in the body, specifically targeting what he called the laughing veins. He posited that if the blood in these specific veins overheated, it caused a ticklish sensation that escalated into uncontrollable motor movement.
Okay, kind of Galenic, but a bit different.
Second, he identifies chorea imaginativa. This is where he brushes right up against pure modern psychology.
The imagination causing it.
He argues that the disease can be spread purely by the imagination and by sight. If you witness the dance, the joy and fear impress upon your mind so forcefully that your rational reason is suppressed and your body involuntarily mimics the affliction.
That is basically modern social contagion theory.
It is incredibly perceptive. But then we get to his third category, which is where his personal prejudices completely take over.
Uh-oh.
He calls it chorea lasciva. He explicitly blames the inciting incident Frau Troffe's original dance-on sexual desire, female stubbornness, and inherent sin.
Of course he does.
He proposes that she started dancing purely to annoy her husband, and that her spite was so intense, so venomous, that it mutated into a physical disease.
Wow.
He blames the ensuing plague almost entirely on women and minstrels, who were the traditional, easy scapegoats of that era.
The tension in his work is incredible. On one hand, Paracelsus is exhibiting blatant textbook misogyny, blaming the victims and framing female emotion as a literal infectious disease.
Right, it's just pure prejudice.
But simultaneously, he is executing a revolutionary scientific pivot. By classifying choreomania into these 3 distinct biological and psychological categories, he completely strips away the supernatural elements.
He takes God and the devil out of the equation.
He tells the church and the state, this is not God. This is not Saint Vitus punishing you. This is not a demonic possession. He places the root of the disease squarely inside the human organism, specifically highlighting the power of the human mind and imagination.
And his prescribed cure for chorea lasciva perfectly reflects this brutal, radical new paradigm.
What did he suggest they do?
Instead of relying on holy water and red shoes, Paracelsus suggested taking these supposedly sinful, spiteful dancers and locking them in a completely dark, unpleasant room.
Just isolation.
No light, no music, no sensory stimulation whatsoever. He prescribed a merciless diet of only bread and water until hunger and isolation broke their will and forced their minds to abandon the dancing compulsion.
That sounds like torture.
It was a horrific, punitive treatment, but historically speaking, it marked the violent, messy birth of psychosomatic medicine. It was the very first recognition by a medical professional that you could cure a physical symptom by aggressively targeting the patient's psychological state.
Which brings us perfectly to the ultimate scientific debate of our modern era. When contemporary scientists and historians look back at the 1518 event, they naturally demand an empirical biological explanation.
Because we don't like psychological mysteries today.
We want a bug or a virus or a toxin to point at. For a long time, the dominant theory, the one you will find in most casual summaries, documentaries, and internet articles about the event, is the ergot hypothesis.
Right. If you bring up the dancing plague at a dinner party, someone is inevitably going to mention the poisoned bread.
Let's really look closely at this ergot theory, because on the surface, it sounds like the perfect, rational, scientific silver bullet. Ergot, or Claviceps purpurea, is a toxic fungus that grows on damp rye grain.
And rye was a staple crop then.
When people harvest that infected rye, mill it into flour, and bake it into bread, they ingest the fungus. Ergot produces powerful psychoactive alkaloids that are structurally very similar to lysergic acid diethylamide.
That's LSD.
Exactly, the naturally occurring psychedelic.
So the popular theory goes like this. The starving peasants of Strasbourg, suffering from famine, ate moldy, ergot-infected rye bread, experienced massive involuntary LSD trips, and essentially hallucinated their way into a month-long rave.
Right, they were suffering from convulsive ergotism.
Which was widely known in the Middle Ages as St. Anthony's fire. It causes muscle twitching, severe spasms, and wild, terrifying hallucinations.
It sounds incredibly plausible. You have a wet spring, moldy crops, starving people eating whatever contaminated grain they can find, and suddenly everyone is tripping and convulsing in the streets. Mystery solved, right?
It is a very neat, tidy, and ultimately deeply flawed narrative. And we have to ruthlessly, systematically attack it because the physiological facts simply do not support it.
Where does it fall apart?
Ergotism is an absolute vascular nightmare. While it does cause hallucinations and muscle spasms, its primary physiological effect is severe vasoconstriction.
Meaning it tightens the blood vessels.
The alkaloids in the fungus bind to receptors in the blood vessels, causing them to clamp shut. It restricts the blood flow to the extremities so aggressively that it causes dry gangrene.
Dry gangrene.
Fingers, toes, and entire limbs turn black, die, and literally fall off the body.
Oh my God.
I want you to consider the biomechanics of that for just a moment. A person suffering from the severe vascular restriction, oxygen deprivation, and agonizing tissue death of gangrenous ergotism cannot maintain coordinated, rhythmic, cardiovascularly demanding dancing for 4 weeks.
Because their muscles are literally dying.
If your muscles have no oxygenated blood, you cannot dance. It is biomechanically impossible.
That's a massive hole in the theory. The very act of sustained dancing disproves the poisoning that supposedly caused the dancing.
Furthermore, convulsive ergotism induces profound gastrointestinal distress. We are talking about severe vomiting and dysentery.
Which we didn't see in the chronicles.
It also causes a terrifying neurological symptom called formication, which is the distinct, agonizing physical sensation of thousands of ants crawling just beneath your skin.
That sounds agonizing.
It is. Ergotism causes erratic, crippling pain and disjointed, floor-bound seizures. It does not cause the sustained, upright, coordinated, socially contagious dancing observed in Strasbourg.
It's a totally different physical profile.
Finally, when we look at the historical climatology records, the major outbreaks of choreomania simply do not align with the specific wet and cold climate patterns required for heavy ergot cultivation.
So it's just a myth.
The ergot theory is a convenient, modern retrodiagnosis that completely ignores the localized, cultural, and highly specific behavioral nature of the event.
So if we completely throw out the poison bread theory, because the biology doesn't work, and we obviously dismiss the idea of a demonic curse, we are left with the true culprit.
The psychological one.
And this is where the story stops being a bizarre historical footnote and becomes a deeply unsettling mirror for our own minds. We're looking at a textbook, devastating case of mass psychogenic illness.
To understand how mass psychogenic illness operates on this massive scale, we need to look at the neurology of trauma. We can frame it using the concepts of viscous time theory and the informational density trigger.
Break that down for me.
Think of human consciousness not as a solitary, isolated computer, but as a deeply connected node in a vast, interactive network. When a localized population is subjected to chronic, unbearable, inescapable trauma, the years of famine, the freezing winters, the rotting flesh of syphilis, the apocalyptic dread we discussed earlier, the psychological anguish in that network reaches a critical density.
It's just too much data to process.
The human brain functions primarily as a prediction engine. It needs to make sense of the world to survive. But when faced with an environment that promises only random death and suffering, the prefrontal cortex, the logical, reasoning part of the brain, is overwhelmed.
It essentially shorts out.
The amygdala, the fear center, goes into permanent overdrive. The HPA axis, the system controlling our stress hormones, is flooded. The mind desperately seeks a mechanism of escape or expression. It has to discharge this unbearable nervous voltage.
And it finds that expression in the cultural vocabulary available to it. In 1518 Strasbourg, that vocabulary was deeply religious, deeply superstitious, and incredibly specific.
They had the script ready.
The people had been raised on the terrifying stories of the Kolbig dancers and the Aachen plague. They believed implicitly in the wrath of Saint Vitus, a saint who specifically punished sinners by forcing them to dance.
So it was their worst fear.
So when the psychological pressure cooker finally blows, the brain converts that invisible, unbearable emotional anguish into highly visible, involuntary physical symptoms. The brain physically writes a motor program based on a cultural fear.
Frau Traffe's mind cracked, and her basal ganglia, the part of the brain that controls motor function, enacted the exact curse her culture had taught her to fear.
It is the ultimate terrifying manifestation of the mind-body connection. The behavioral contagion is transmitted socially, visually, and psychologically.
Which takes us back to Paracelsus and Chorea Imaginativa.
When the other stressed, starving citizens watched Frau Traffe and saw the city council validate the disease by building stages and hiring drummers, the informational precipitation occurred.
They saw it, and their brains accepted it as real.
Their own subconscious minds, seeking an outlet for their own unbearable terror, recognized the physical pattern and adopted it. The mind absolutely believes it is cursed to dance. Therefore, it bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely and forces the central nervous system to obey.
The body becomes a captive to the cultural belief. The brain literally overrides the pain of bleeding feet and lactic acid because the psychological imperative to discharge the trauma is stronger than the biological imperative to rest.
And if you're listening to this and thinking that this is some relic of the superstitious Middle Ages, that we are too smart or too scientifically advanced for this to happen today, you are completely wrong.
Oh, it still happens all the time.
We see the exact same mechanisms in modern equivalents. They're just shaped by different cultural expectations. Look at the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962.
Right, where a single joke in a boarding school triggered a wave of uncontrollable, painful laughter and crying.
It spread to thousands of people and forced the closure of multiple schools for months. Or look at the 2011 outbreak in Leroy, New York.
The cheerleaders, right.
Yes, where over a dozen high school girls suddenly developed severe Tourette-like facial tics and vocal outbursts. Teams of environmental scientists went in. There was no environmental toxin in Leroy.
Just like there was no viral infection in Tanganyika.
It was mass psychogenic illness, spread through the social network, exacerbated by media attention and profound localized psychological stress.
The underlying neurological mechanism is identical, only the choreography has changed. The mind experiences an intolerable cognitive load, and it offloads that distress onto the physical body, utilizing whatever physical language the culture provides.
So it's always culturally specific.
In Tanganyika, the cultural language was laughter. In Leroy, it was vocal tics. In Strasbourg, situated right in the heart of the St. Vitus corridor, it was an agonizing, relentless dance.
Which allows us to pull all this together into a grand synthesis. The dancing plague of 1518 was not a viral infection that swept through the cobblestone streets.
It was not a mass fungal poisoning born from damp rye.
And it certainly was not a demonic curse handed down by an angry saint. The dancing plague was a tragic, vivid, and awe-inspiring testament to the absolute power of human belief and collective trauma.
It forces us to realize that our bodies are the ultimate canvases for our cultural anxieties. We like to think of our physical forms as objective biological machines completely separate from our thoughts.
But they aren't.
They are deeply, inextricably wired to our collective psyche. When a society reaches its absolute breaking point, the trauma doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't disappear into thin air.
It mutates.
It ferments, and eventually it bursts forth, taking whatever shape the culture expects it to take. The people of Strasbourg literally danced their pain, their terror, and their starvation into physical existence.
It is a harrowing reminder of what happens when the mind can no longer bear the reality of its environment. The illusion of free will shatters, and the body becomes an instrument of pure, unadulterated psychological survival.
No matter how physically destructive that survival mechanism might be to the individual.
Which leaves us with a profound, lingering question to consider. We look back at 1518 and we marvel at the bizarre, uncontrollable physical manifestation of their societal trauma. We view the dancing plague as a wild historical anomaly.
But if 16th century trauma manifested as an uncontrollable physical dance, how is our modern collective trauma manifesting right now?
Think about the chronic, low-grade dread we all live with today. The constant influx of apocalyptic news, the economic anxieties, the localized panics. What if our modern compulsions are driven by the exact same psychological mechanisms?
You mean our current behaviors could be symptoms?
What if our endless, involuntary digital scrolling, the hours spent swiping into dissociative days, are collective behavioral loops? What if these are simply the 21st century equivalent of the dancing plague?
A silent, motionless trance we are all trapped in, orchestrated by the unique stress of our times.
It is a sobering thought. The symptoms change, but the human mind's desperate need to offload its anxiety remains exactly the same.
Thank you for giving us your time today. If this exploration shifted your perspective or helped you understand the incredible power of the mind-body connection, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
Check the description below for reference links and more information.
Until next time, keep questioning the reality your mind constructs.
Aleatory Podcast.